Scattered across Nevada's desert are the ruins of places that shouldn't exist. Not abandoned buildings, entire cities. Banks, railroads, opera houses, electric grids, built in some of the harshest terrain on Earth, occupied by thousands, then emptied in years. We're counting down 9 of these ghost towns, ranked by the sheer impossibility of their existence. From mining camps that rivaled modern cities to a town swallowed whole by a rising lake, each entry deepens one unsettling question. How did any of this get here? We begin where a 3-story bank still stands in the middle of nothing. Number 9. Rhyolite rises out of the Nevada desert like a mirage, a city that materialized almost overnight, a metropolis that vanished just as quickly. In 1905, a gold strike in the Bullfrog Hills brought thousands of people to this barren landscape. At its peak, as many as 6,000 residents crowded its streets, and the Montgomery-Shoshone mine churned out more than $1 million in bullion, equivalent to $26 million today. But it was not just the scale of extraction that defied belief. Rhyolite boasted 3 railroads, electric lighting, a municipal water system, a hospital, a stock exchange, and even an opera house. Charles M. Schwab, the steel magnate, poured millions into the town's future, funding a 100-mile power line and a lavish concrete bank that still stands, empty and skeletal, on the edge of the desert. Yet the entire city rested on a fragile promise. The ore body beneath Rhyolite was narrow and patchy, its riches quickly overstated by early speculation. When a 1908 assessment revealed the limits of the mine, and the panic of 1907 froze outside investment, the town's fortunes collapsed almost instantly. The population plunged below 700 by 1910. Within another few years, the post office closed, the train stopped running, and electric service was cut. By the early 1920s, Rhyolite was silent, its grand ambitions reduced to a handful of concrete shells and the famous bottle house, built from 51,000 discarded glass bottles. Today, the bank's facade, the depot, and the schoolhouse stand as mute witnesses to a city built on hope, scale, and a single, unsustainable gamble. Rhyolite's remains are a physical riddle, a metropolis that should not exist, stranded in the emptiest corner of Nevada. 8th place, Goldfield stands as Nevada's most improbable metropolis, a city that emerged from the desert dust with the promise of limitless gold. Founded in 1902, Goldfield surged to over 20,000 residents within just a few years, transforming into the state's largest city by 1906. Its streets were lined with brick hotels, banks, courthouse. Electric streetcars rattled down Main Street, and 2 railroad lines connected Goldfield to distant markets. At its peak, the mines produced gold worth more than $1.4 billion in today's dollars, a fortune pulled from ground that barely supported a single ranch before the boom. But this city's foundations were always fragile. The ore body was finite, and by 1909, the richest veins were already exhausted. Still, the infrastructure remained: grand buildings, a courthouse, and the famous Goldfield Hotel, clinging to a shrinking population. Then, on June 28, 1923, disaster struck. A fire ignited in the heart of the business district, fueled by drought-dried wood and relentless wind. Eyewitnesses describe flames racing through block after block, overwhelming the town's limited water supply. In a single day, nearly 70% of Goldfield's commercial core was reduced to ash. The city's tax base and remaining optimism vanished in the smoke. Within 2 years, fewer than 5,000 people remained. The banks closed, the streetcars stopped, and the railroad's whistle faded into silence. Today, the courthouse and the restored hotel stand as the last sentinels of a metropolis that once defied logic, a city-scale experiment in ambition erased by fire and the limits of the land. Goldfield's ruins challenge the imagination. How could so much have been built here, only to disappear so completely? Number 7. Belmont rises from a sweep of Nevada sagebrush as a paradox. A county seat built on silver dreams, now reduced to a solitary brick courthouse standing over empty land. Founded in 1865, Belmont quickly became the administrative heart of Nye County, its fortune staked entirely on the output of 6 nearby mills. At its peak, the town supported around 2,500 residents and produced more than $8 million in silver, a sum worth roughly $220 million today. Stage lines linked Belmont to distant markets, and the courthouse, completed in 1876, anchored a main street lined with banks, hotels, a school, and the steady churn of the Belmont Mining Company. Yet the town's fate was never in its own hands. The Panic of 1893 sent silver prices into freefall across the United States. Almost overnight, the value of Belmont's ore collapsed, forcing mines to close and payrolls to vanish. With no new industry to replace mining, the population dwindled to a handful of families by the turn of the century. The post office closed in 1901, and the courthouse, once the center of regional power, fell silent, its stone walls left to weather in the high desert wind. Unlike towns felled by violence or fire, Belmont was undone by the invisible hand of the market, a casualty of distant decisions and global prices. Today, the courthouse remains the lone sentinel, a monument to a civic hub built on a gamble that never stood a chance against the forces of the wider economy. Number 6. Berlin stands as a paradox in the high desert, a mining town whose collapse led not to erasure, but to preservation by science. Founded in 1896 after copper and silver were discovered in the Shoshone Range, Berlin quickly grew to a population of 1,200. In little more than a decade, its mines extracted ore worth $5 million, or about $140 million today. The town had a bank, a hotel, a schoolhouse, and a rail spur, all built in anticipation of lasting prosperity. But the ore bodies proved shallow, and by the early 1910s, production could no longer support the community. The breaking point came in 1914, when a sudden flood tore through the canyon, destroying the mill and the rail line that connected Berlin to the outside world. Mining operations became impossible almost overnight, and the population vanished almost as quickly as it had arrived. Yet Berlin did not disappear into obscurity. In 1905, even before the flood, paleontologists uncovered a trove of ichthyosaur fossils in the hills above town, giant marine reptiles preserved in stone for 200 million years. As the economic engine sputtered, these fossils drew scientists and tourists, giving Berlin a second life. In 1970, the state of Nevada designated the area as Berlin Ichthyosaur State Park, preserving the original mine ruins, the brick schoolhouse, and the fossil beds themselves. Unlike most ghost towns, Berlin's remains are not just mute witnesses to lost ambition, they are the focus of ongoing discovery, a rare case where collapse made way for a new kind of legacy. The empty schoolhouse and silent mine tunnels now share the landscape with the fossilized bones of ancient creatures, a collision of human hope and deep time that could only happen in a place like this. Number 5. Pioche stands as the most violent chapter in Nevada's mining history, a settlement where lawlessness shaped not just daily life, but the very speed of its collapse. Founded in 1869 on the promise of silver, Pioche attracted thousands almost overnight, swelling to a population of 4,000 by the mid-1870s. The town's mines produced $12 million in silver, roughly $330 million in today's terms. But Pioche's real notoriety came from its streets, not its ore. Territorial court files and local newspapers recorded a homicide rate of 3 per 1,000 residents, unmatched anywhere else in the West. From 1872 to 1878, at least 27 people were killed in gunfights and claim disputes, with the infamous 1874 massacre leaving 5 dead in a single night. The violence was so endemic that the territorial government dispatched a militia and imposed stricter gun controls, but by then, Pioche's reputation had taken its toll. Investors and families began to leave, unwilling to risk their lives for silver. When the silver market slumped in 1884, the exodus accelerated, and the town lost half its residents within 3 years. Today, Pioche's restored courthouse and mining museum remain, silent witnesses to a place where ambition and violence collided. It is an improbable city that rose and fell on the edge of the possible. Number 4. Unionville stands as Nevada's most improbable myth. An entire town conjured not by the promise of rich ore, but by the power of belief and the echo chamber of the press. It was founded in 1865 on the edge of the Humboldt Trail. Unionville's fortunes swelled on rumors of silver and gold, with the population peaking at around 1,200. Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, never lived here, but his biting coverage in the territorial enterprise between 1866 and 1868 gave Unionville a national profile. His articles, filled with wry skepticism, painted the place as a boomtown in the making. The effect was electric, and prospectors and merchants arrived in droves, convinced by headlines and hearsay that riches lay just beneath the dust. But the reality was always thinner than the legend. Payroll books from the Union Mine reveal a brief period of modest extraction, about $70 million in modern silver and gold, before ore grades faded and wages dried up. The main employer, the Union Mine, shut its doors in 1899, and with it, the illusion of prosperity evaporated. The post office closed in 1905, and the last school bell rang soon after. Today, a handful of stone homes, a restored schoolhouse, and the hillside cemetery are all that remain. Unionville's story is a cautionary tale about the fragility of perception. A town inflated by optimism and press, sustained by little more than hope, and left behind as soon as the headlines moved on. Its ruins are a quiet rebuke to the idea that belief alone can conjure permanence out of the Nevada desert. Number 3. Metropolis stands as Nevada's most audacious experiment in engineered settlement. A city mapped out in 1905 with the promise of transforming desert into a thriving industrial hub. Developers envisioned a metropolis of 10,000, anchored by a copper-zinc smelter and a grid of irrigated farmland. By 1909, the population reached 1,500, and the town's output, measured in today's dollars, approached $55 million. Streets were laid, a concrete schoolhouse rose on the plain, and the Metropolis Land and Water Company filed for rights to divert 5,000 acre-feet from the Humboldt River. Everything depended on water, the lifeblood of smelting and the key to sustaining a permanent community in the high desert. But Metropolis was built on a legal and environmental impossibility. In 1914, the Nevada Supreme Court ruled that the town's water claim would be capped at just 1,500 acre-feet, a fraction of what was needed. The decision, rooted in the doctrine of prior appropriation, handed priority to downstream ranchers and left Metropolis's grand irrigation canal unfinished. The smelter, unable to operate at scale, shuttered within months. Population dropped below 200 by 1920, and the planned city faded almost overnight. The concrete foundations of the smelter and the intake pipes still scar the landscape, a silent record of ambition defeated not by resource depletion or fire, but by the hard limits of law and hydrology. In Metropolis, the ruins do not just mark a failed town. They reveal the boundary where hope, infrastructure, and the desert's realities collide. The logic of settlement was reversed here. The city was abandoned not when the resource ran out, but when the rules said it could never be used. Coming to the top 3, St. Thomas stands as the only Nevada ghost town deliberately erased by federal design. Founded in 1865 at the confluence of the Virgin and Muddy Rivers, St. Thomas grew into a farming hub of nearly 800 residents, its fields irrigated by a handmade canal system that carved green rows into the desert. For generations, families harvested melons, cotton, and corn from soil that should have been inhospitable, building a community with a school, post office, and street grid mapped out in hopeful regularity. But the fate of St. Thomas was sealed far from its own valley. In 1935, the federal government acquired every acre, preparing for the rise of Lake Mead behind the new Hoover Dam. Residents were paid to leave, their homes and fields marked for submersion. The water advanced slowly, season by season, swallowing the streets and gardens. Ray Andress, the last to remain, described in a 1963 oral history how the water rose a foot each spring, swallowing the gardens he tended as a child. He left in 1964, when the lake finally reached an elevation of 1,270 feet, erasing the last rooftops. Today, only the concrete foundation of the school and fragments of the canal emerge when drought lowers the reservoir, their outlines mapped by sonar and underwater archaeology. The street grid, once filled with life, is now a ghostly pattern on the lake bed. St. Thomas is a paradox, an entire town not destroyed by market collapse or violence, but by the deliberate flooding of a landscape, its existence rendered impossible by the sweep of a federal water project. Its remains surface only when the water recedes, a fleeting reminder that even thriving communities can be erased by decisions made far upstream. And finally, in first place, Virginia City stands as the most improbable of Nevada's vanished empires, a city engineered at a scale that defied its setting and ultimately hastened its own undoing. Born in 1859 from the discovery of the Comstock Lode, Virginia City swelled to over 25,000 people. Its fortunes built on a mountain of silver and gold that would yield more than $400 million in 19th century dollars, about $11 billion today. This was not just a mining camp, but a metropolis. Banks, opera houses, hotels, schools, and the Virginia and Truckee Railroad all rose from the sagebrush, transforming a barren slope into the financial and political engine of Nevada. Yet the city's greatest strength, its relentless drive to extract wealth, became its undoing. The engineering feats here were unprecedented. The Sutro Tunnel, begun in 1869, stretched nearly 4 miles to drain 25 million gallons of water from the mines, allowing deeper and more dangerous shafts to be worked. Square-set timbering, invented in Virginia City, let miners carve out vast chambers underground, multiplying extraction rates far beyond what had been possible anywhere else in the world. Investors poured in, and the city's ledgers tracked fortunes made and lost at a dizzying pace. But these innovations came at a cost. The tunnel and timbering accelerated the exhaustion of the Comstock Lode. By the early 1880s, the richest veins were spent, and the city's population began to slip away. The final blow came in 1893, when a global collapse in silver prices shuttered the last profitable mines. Within a decade, Virginia City's population had fallen below 5,000. The infrastructure, rail lines, hotels, courthouses remained, stranded in a landscape that could no longer justify their existence. Today, the historic district endures as a living museum, wooden sidewalks, the original courthouse, the dark mouth of the Sutro Tunnel, and the outlines of the old mines. Virginia City's story is not just one of boom and bust, but of a city that built itself out of nothing, scaled heights no one thought possible, and then vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. It is the ultimate example of Nevada's impossible ambition, a place where engineering, finance, and human willpower conjured an empire from the desert, and where, in the end, the very systems that created it made its collapse inevitable. Across all 9 of these abandoned settlements, one unsettling pattern emerges. Entire cities, including banks, schools, and railroads, were conjured in barren wilderness, only to collapse almost overnight. Nevada's ghost towns reveal how quickly ambition can shape the land, and how fragile even the grandest infrastructure becomes when its foundation disappears. Their ruins stand as proof that what seems impossible can briefly become real, then vanish, leaving only emptiness behind. Which town surprised you most?